Yes.
So first off, Willie, are they paying your way to Norway? Are they paying your way to Norway?
Oh, nice.
All right, so I'll probably talk off the slide a lot because I'm not used to following the slide. I'm more like just talk off the top of my head. So if I get ahead of myself and repeat, just bear with me. If you have questions along the way, you do not have to wait till the end. Just call them out. You don't have to raise your hand or nothing, okay? This PowerPoint is really when I use it for a lot of different groups. So I'll be going through some that are just not appropriate because they're more like for women. But if you want to, have that, I can talk about that too.
As soon as we get it up here.
Okay.
Wake up to the
It's amazing how technology is.
So I'm glad that you're here, Ricky, because a lot of this stuff will really help you a lot because the sooner you start with pelvic floor health, the better off you are. I assume at this point that you're not incontinent right now. After a prostate surgery, sometimes that can be, doesn't have to be, but sometimes that is a side effect. So the stronger your pelvic floor muscles are and the better you can use them in the beginning, the easier your rehab is and the quicker you get your continence back. Can you all hear me again? You're all okay with this? Okay. All right, so the pelvic floor, basically all that is the group of muscles. They're at the bottom of your pelvis. They go from your pubic bone in front, they go out to your butt bones that you sit on, and back to your sacrum and tailbone. So literally it's this hammock of muscle that sits at the bottom of your pelvis. So these muscles they're the workhorses of the body. They support everything above it. They have the sphincteric function for closing off the bowel and bladder. They open up for emptying the bowel and bladder. They are your core muscles. They talk back to your bowel and bladder to tell them are they supposed to be storing or are they supposed to be emptying. So they do a lot of very important things.
Just tell me what.
Oh, you're doing that. Okay, go ahead and on. Yeah. So, and do it again. Muscles, so the organs, the ligaments, are the supportive structures, the connective tissue holding everything together. So the muscles of the pelvic floor, go ahead and keep going there. So for a woman, again, and for men, they go from the pubic bone back to the sacrum and tailbone. So here's this hammock of muscle. For women, of course, here's the bladder, here's the vagina, uterus, here's the colon, here are the openings, the urethra, the vagina, and the rectum. And of course, for men, you just have the two, the urethra, which is much longer, and then the rectum. I'm going to the next picture. So on a male, of course, here's the prostate here. I heard somebody mentioning about when they go in and they take out the prostate, what they are doing is they are, go back. I'm trying to get this guy to go back.
There it is.
So, of course, here's the prostate. The urethra goes right through the prostate, something that you may or may not know. You probably don't because you guys are really, I've always been very impressed with your knowledge level. But the prostate doesn't just grow outwards, but it also grows inwards. So the urethra often gets squished and compressed. So that can often be why you get some of your BPH symptoms, difficulty urinating, emptying the bladder, that sort of thing. So when they remove the prostate, they have to, like say, disengage the urethra from the bladder neck, right here, and then also from down here. And depending on how much they have to dissect because of the cancerous margins, a lot of your the damage done during the surgery itself is what's going to create some of the symptoms that you may have. So the more that is scooped out of the muscle, the muscle right down here will determine how much is left. But on a guy, really the pelvic floor muscles are the last defense for continence. What really creates the continence in a male is the passive resistance of the urethra inside the prostate. Then it's where the bladder neck and the urethra connect together. and then it is the pelvic floor muscles. So if the pelvic floor muscles are not affected with the surgery itself, and there's not a lot of dissection done with the bladder and neck, oftentimes your continence comes back fairly quickly after the catheter is removed out. All right, go on to the next slide. So on a female, of course, here are the muscles from the outside. I'm going to the next. So on a male, here are the muscles. So you have these guys right here, called the superficial urogenital diaphragm, and then the deeper levator ani muscles. So we're, I wanted to pass this out. I don't have enough, but I wanted to show you better pictures of. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I don't have pictures up here, but what you're going to be seeing is a cross-section of the important parts of the muscle. And what I want you to note on this is where the prostate is. And I need to get one too, right? Thank you. So you'll notice where the prostate is and where the muscles come in. So the muscles that you use to stop your flow of urine, stop your flow of urine, those are the superficial genital the diaphragm. And then the deeper muscles, like the muscles that you would stop a sphincter from coming out, they're all kind of like part of the same muscle group, sort of like your quad. Your quads are 4 different muscles, but when you straighten out your knee, all 4 muscles kick in. You can't do one over the other. So when you pull in your muscles that stop your flow of urine, you'll also be pulling in your rectal muscles. You can't really separate them, but you want to be working on them both, because the muscles that stop your, like a fart from coming in, that muscle goes right to the bladder neck. And that's where you really want to get some closure. And the muscles that stop your flow of urine are the muscles that more are down. You'll see, I think this is called your, like your ischiocavernosus, vulvocavernosus, and then the deeper layer is your levator ani. But what you really want to try to do, what I do with males and females is, one, these are not muscles you go to the gym and work out. You just don't think about your pelvic floor. They're only muscles in your body that are voluntary, like your biceps and triceps. And then you have involuntary muscles, like your pupils that constrict, your blood vessels that constrict and dilate, your hair that grows. Those are all muscles that you don't control, so those are called involuntary muscles. Your pelvic floor are the only muscles that are voluntary and involuntary at the same time. So you can go through your whole life and not even know you have them, as long as your brain is working. So when you sit down or stand to pee, you can just, I'm gonna intend to pee, and you do. Voila, the pelvic muscles do their thing, right? They relax. That tells the bladder to contract, and you empty your bladder. So oftentimes people think that if they're doing this, they're doing pelvic floor muscle exercises when they're not. And guys are notorious for bringing everything in because they want to do everything. So it's teaching both men and women how to isolate the right muscle and making sure that they are getting good contraction, good awareness, know when to contract, teaching yourself, if you know you leak when you cough or sneeze, you learn how to contract first before that comes. Yes?
Is that the Kegel exercise?
That is a Kegel exercise. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
It works.
Good. I'm glad. It should work. If the muscles are working right and there's enough muscle there to do the trick, it can stop. Oh yes, it can stop a leak from occurring. Now that's just one type of leak that you can get. That's the stress incontinence. And stress meaning gravitational stress, not mental stress. So when you cough, sneeze, gravity, that's the stress incontinence. Then there's urge incontinence. And urge incontinence, you can actually have some urgency prior to having any sort of procedure done. Urge incontinence is when you feel like you have to urinate and you can't make it to the toilet before you leak, or you walk to the toilet and the closer you get, the stronger the urge becomes. It's really an overactive bladder. It's a bladder that is, of course, let's go back. The bladder is a muscle smooth muscle, whose job is just to relax and store pee, and then to contract and empty. It's a very simple organ, that's all it does, relaxes, stores, contracts, and empties. The problem is when it messes up its functions. It doesn't know when it's supposed to be storing, when it's supposed to be emptying. So urge incontinence is when you train the bladder how to store all the way to the toilet. So you're not, it's not prematurely going into its emptying phase when you get there. And sometimes that can happen when somebody has had prostate cancer or hypertrophy, because the blockage of the urethra from an enlarging prostate inward can compress that, and that can make the bladder over time a little gnarly, where normally it's like a balloon that fills up, it's nice and smooth, and when it contracts, it empties like this. Over time, that can make the bladder not want to do its expansion and contraction well, so those functions can get messed up a bit. Okay. And this is just like looking at the inside of a pelvic bowl. So you take all the organs out. And on a woman, here's the urethra, the vagina, and rectum. For a guy, it's the exact same thing, just remove the vagina. So you see, I want you to see this, literally this bowl-like structure that these muscles have. So of course, you know, the kidneys are filtering the blood, and that's what creates the urine stream. Urine is your byproducts of your bloodstream, so it's very acidic. It's urea, it's uric acid. So what you are drinking is going to affect your bladder behavior. So if all you're doing is drinking coffee or tea, caffeine, other acidics, juices, sodas, carbonation, chemical stuff, and we already know that your bladder, your urine by itself is acid, then what you have in your bladder can be affecting how your bladder is storing. So we do also talk about fluid management, making sure you're getting in appropriate fluid intake. Water works to help dilute acids. So a lot of times people think if I just don't drink anything, I won't leak anything, but actually that can make things worse, because then your urine is more acidic and more irritating to the bladder. So this just shows the bladder itself. Of course, here's the urethra, and then the lining right here is very sensitive to acid. And then, of course, the muscle, the smooth muscle around it. So again, I've sorry, gotten ahead of myself. The function of the pelvic floor, go ahead, and is the sphincter, the ability of the muscle to close off the faucets. Supportive, supporting everything above it. The trunk stability through core support. It's sexual appreciation. So the urinary incontinence types, usually what we're talking about here after prostatectomy, and again, it doesn't have to happen, but if it does, it's going to be a stress incontinent type of problem, and sometimes if there's an urge with it. And of course, an overactive bladder, again, is just a bladder that is contracting too much, making you sense that you have to pee, giving you urinary frequency. It's not relaxing and storing well. And mixed just means it can be a mixture of all these different types, and that's fairly common also. Iatrogenic, all that means is it's made by some sort of procedure that was done. Like sometimes medications can do that, or surgery can do that. And functional incontinence is when you leak because maybe you can't get up to the bathroom. So it's more of a functional problem than it is an actual bladder problem itself. So stress incontinence is just increase in intraabdominal pressure. So it's gravity, it's jumping, it's coughing, laughing, sneezing. Anything that makes the belly contract is going to put pressure on the bladder. And if there's not a good faucet muscle to hold it off, then that's what can create leaks. So the signs are going to be losses of urine when you do something. It's pretty, you can, if it's happened to you in the past, then you kind of can predict it can happen in the future.
Can you beat it?
Say again?
Can you beat that? I have it.
Yeah. Well, you know
it's
what?
a battle.
Hearing what your prostate was and how big it was and how much they had to scoop. So
Your muscles are
with
probably
yours, it had a lot to do with the amount of dissection that had to be done to get that darn prostate from growing on you.
Yeah.
So you're not a huge candidate, especially if it's, how long ago did you have the prostate removed?
4 years.
Yeah, usually you're gonna get most of your improvement the first 3 to 6 months after surgery and up to 1 to 2 years afterwards.
He said Kegel exercises, and I didn't understand that, of course.
Yeah. For you, I think your best bet, it's not gonna hurt you. Have you ever gone through a Kegel program?
No.
It's never even been recommended for you?
I don't know whether it was a recommended, there was no class. He says,
Yeah.
well, go to this class. I would have gone to a class if he'd suggested it. But
Yeah, and I don't know
But-
if, I wouldn't feel comfortable standing in front of here and making sure that all you know how to do your exercises correctly. You know, you don't know for sure unless you actually check to see what you're doing right. So for you, if you think you know how to Kegel, start Kegeling.
Is there a YouTube video perhaps?
Again, I don't think that it would be an appropriate thing because we have to have it checked. to
That's
make sure
right,
you
you
do it
gotta know
right.
whether it's
But if you're able to pull your rectal outlet up and close it off like you're stopping a fart,
Yeah.
and you're not doing anything else, I can't see you move and nothing else is happening, you're probably okay, and it wouldn't hurt to start looking at it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay?
Cool.
And then especially since you know when it can happen, like you can predict when it's going to happen, right?
My grandson wants me to go on the trampoline. I say,
Oh,
no,
yeah.
no.
Yeah, that's not a good one.
So,
If you
yeah.
can predict when it's going to happen, then basically tighten before. If you don't, you can't really do that every time you jump, of course. But before you cough, bend over, lift, sneeze.
Tighten her up.
Yeah, just kind of if you can time it, sometimes you can prevent it.
Ah, okay.
All right, so this just shows somebody coughing and then what happens with the urethra. Okay, go on to the next. So urgent continence, like I said before, is the pressure in the bladder because the bladder is inappropriately contracting that's pushing the urine past the urinary sphincter mechanism. So the signs are going to be having urgency to urinate, urinary frequency, possibly urinating a lot at night, and then your bladder, since it doesn't want to store, you're having to pee more often too. All right, so we can go on to that because this is women's stuff. We can go on to that. Okay, so the risk factors for urinary incontinence are going to be age. The younger you are, the better off you are. Race, because the pelvic floor muscle is actually an African American, and we think it's because, let me go on, the pelvic floor muscles in African Americans tend to be stronger, and they think it's because of the angle of the sacrum. So if the sacrum is angled more like vertical, like you tend to do with Asians, they tend to have a flatter back. So then the muscles are connecting from the tailbone to the pubic bone, and they're more down like this, making the angle of the urethra different. On African Americans, they tend to be, the sacrum tends to be more of a horizontal, so it changes the angle of the vagina and the urethra. So it tends to help with strength of the pelvic floor. Pregnancy and childbirth is of course, pretty well understood. Menopause and depletion of estrogen. So as we lose our estrogen, the tissue, one of the factors of estrogen that probably doesn't have a whole lot of relative influence on men, but that estrogen helps keep tissue moist and thick and has what we call rugae. And when we lose that, it can get thinner and drier, which can affect the urethra. So pelvic surgeries, of course, including prostatectomies or the TURP procedure. Smoking can affect tissues dramatically, and there's more and more research out on that. I know a lot of surgeons won't even do surgery on many people until they stop smoking for a while. Have you guys heard that from your surgeons? Has anybody ever heard that?
I've heard of it.
All right. Because they want it to be a good surgical outcome. So they want to do everything they can prior to making sure the tissue is healthy enough to repair itself. And if you smoke, that tends to decrease the oxygen to the tissues and decreases a better outcome. So obesity, of course, is because the pressure coming down can create more weight on the urethra, making you more likely to leak through. Of course, high impact physical activity because of the gravity. Constipation is a big one that people don't recognize and realize, but the bowel and the bladder, both male and female, they compete for space. They're very closely related physically. So if the bowel is filled or, always full and it's not emptying well, it can actually piss off the bladder. It makes the bladder a little not wanting to store as well. It pushes on it, and it doesn't make it happy. All right. So again, the three major mechanisms for continence on a male is the bladder neck, again, where that prostate meets the bladder. It is the passive resistance of the prostatic urethra, and then, of course, the external sphincter itself. So when you have that prostate removed, you're really taking out the top continence mechanisms, and you're now relying on a muscle that didn't have to do much before. And guys don't work on their pelvic floor muscles. It's not something that we're thinking about ever doing. Heck, women don't do it too until something happens. All right, so keep going. So this is more like for women. And this just talks about the smoking and the obesity, and that makes sense. The impact of physical activity, that makes sense. Constipation, the research behind it. Okay, so the rehab involved with working on incontinence is making sure, one, that the patient knows where the muscle is, how to isolate it, how to contract it, how to relax it. And the next is figuring out where, because everybody's different. So that's why you can't just hand out a handout to somebody and say, go home and do your Kegels. It doesn't work that way because everybody starts a different place. One, not everybody knows how to find it. Two, not everybody has the same endurance or the same strength. So if somebody can't hold a contraction for 3 seconds, yet their paper, which I see all the time, go home and hold your contraction for 10 seconds. And they can't even hold it for 2. What are they going to be doing? They're going to be trying to hold, just like if the biceps weak. If this is weak, then they're going to be doing this to compensate. So you have to, you can't just hand out a piece of paper, and that it's done all the time in doctor's offices. Just go home and do your Kegels and hold for 10 seconds. That doesn't tell you much.
How do you learn to do that?
How do you learn to do your Kegels?
Yeah.
You work with someone like me.
Yep.
You have to go to somebody who knows how to teach you how to find the muscle correctly.
Yes, absolutely. That's why she knows.
Coordinating with the transverse abdominal. So the pelvic floor, just like most muscles, don't work in isolation. The transverse abdominal is, your abs are 4 different layers. So starting from the outside, you have the muscle that goes from the rib cage down to the pubic bone. It's the sit-up muscle, it's the tendinous inscriptions, or the six-pack muscle, okay? Then below that, you have your obliques that go this way, and those are the muscles that rotate your trunk. And then beneath that, closest to your organs and peritoneum, is your transverse abdominal. The transverse abdominal starts from the lumbar fascia and comes around like a girdle. So it's the muscle that is this direction. So this muscle is like if you were bending over and just relaxing your belly, and you pull the lower belly up and in, that would be the transverse. So the transverse and the pelvic floor muscles, they work as a unit together. So the pelvic floor, the transverse abdominal, that's your core. So whenever we talk about core setting your core, closing off, so part of this is Kegels, not just working with the pelvic, with the anal sphincter or the urinary sphincter, but teaching how to use your core to support is important. So we teach you how to make sure you know how to do that, how to set your core. Your core is what keeps you stable when you throw a ball, when you run, when you kick, when you jump. And core is all you athletes out there know how important core is. And then integrating that core set with activities that you do in your day. So I never want to tell somebody, you have to go home and do Kegels 3 times a day for the rest of your life. What I do is we want to build the muscle to the point that it is now working, or your symptoms are gone, or you've plateaued in your symptoms for a good 3 months. Nothing's changing. So you're building muscle to the point where now you're using it functionally in your day. And if you've been doing what pelvic floor PTs tell somebody, by that point, it's like automatic. When you go to cough or sneeze, it's automatically cueing in because you have done it over and over and over again. So you functionally use your core throughout your day. And encounter bracing just is timed contraction before you do something that you know will possibly create a leak. So bladder training is now it's more of a bladder problem, the urgent incontinence, the overactive bladder. So then we do bladder training to train the bladder. How do we get this bladder to stay in its relaxed phase as you walk into the toilet? Because the bladder is a habit organ. It's like you can condition the bladder to go into its emptying phase prematurely if every time you run to the bathroom you're having to pee really bad. So the bladder gets used to that. And now that toilet has become a trigger. It's like Pavlov's dogs, if you remember that old research they did back in the 40s. So you want to retrain the bladder to not be going into its emptying phase when you walk into the toilet. You train it to be in this relaxed phase, storing all the way. And that's what bladder training is about. So we talk about making sure the bladder is storing what it likes to store, not what it's trying to get rid of, the irritants that are in there. Making sure you're getting well hydration. You certainly do not have to plug yourself, but getting good hydration, bowel regularity, for what we talked about before. The bladder needs to have room to expand, and it's hitting against the full bowel that's a problem. And then doing what are called urge suppression techniques, and that is just giving 3 different ways that the bladder can actually go into its relaxation phase before you walk to the toilet. So you're always walking in control. And making sure the bladder can have a normal bladder capacity. If the bladder is really small and minimal capacity, then it's not going to store very well. So if the bladder is like a stomach, if you eat a bunch of large meals in a period of time, your stomach literally takes more to feel full. And if you eat small meals over a period of time, literally your stomach gets full faster. Your bladder does the same thing. You can teach it to expand, and you can teach it to really be a small capacity depending on the habits that you do. So let's just go over the research behind caffeine and what it does to a bladder, and we kind of talked about that. And we just talk about what sort of things to try to avoid. I never say to somebody they cannot have their 1 cup of coffee in the morning, because I wouldn't follow that either. But what you're doing to the rest of your day, you're starting out the day maybe with water before you fill it up with coffee, because your first morning urine is always going to be highly concentrated with uric acid anyway, so you just don't want to add more acid to it right off the bat. So fluid intake is if I've asked urologists, what should we be drinking? And the urologists tell me, you don't need to drink any water. You get your water in your soups and in your coffee and in your tea. And then you ask a naturopath. And the naturopath will say, well, you should get at least half your body weight in ounces. So there's no one consensus. I tend to be a centrist. So I say, if you're engaged